Welcome to the Takedown with Nick, subverting power, radical thought. Tonight, I really just want to have almost an impromptu discussion. And the reason why I want to do this discussion is I feel like we just need some more exposure to, other people, thinking along similar lines and kind of understand what drives them, what their struggles are, kind of where they are. So to that end, I've invited Remington Alessi. He's here with us from the Houston Green Party, and he's here just to have a discussion with me and just to kind of expose, where some individual members of the Green Party are. Remington, can you introduce yourself to the audience for us?
Hi. My name is Remington Alessi. I've been an activist for the last several years, involved with the Green Party. I currently sit on the state executive committee for the Green Party of Texas. As an at-large member. I'm currently a law student at U of H. My background is in criminal justice and sociology and economics.
Yeah, see, those are all, very touchy subjects close to our heart, especially when it comes down to, the rubber hits the road. And here's what's funny. I've gone to a couple meetings here, and, I've seen you around. What do you think is going on with the Green Party right now? We've had a very successful, probably like the second most successful presidential run in a long time. What do you see going on as far as the local Green Party here in Houston during this time period?
Well, locally, it's hard to say. And the reason being,
party here in Houston,
we didn't reach a threshold that was necessary in order to maintain ballot access. What that essentially means is that every election cycle, a given party has to get at least 5% of the vote in a statewide race. We've had ballot access for the last several election cycles, but this time around, we didn't have 5% in any races. And that is because the Democratic Party decided to run paper candidates in every race that they could in order to prevent us from getting that 5%.
What do you mean? You see, a lot of people would say that, during a period like this, when the Democratic Party is in an all-time weakness, that, the Green Party should be able to rise, and it's just like fertile ground for the Green Party just to be able to spread like crazy. This should be like the time where they're expanding rapidly.
I want that to be the case. However, you're dealing with a party that has limited resources. We're kind of coming from behind the eight ball as far as dealing with. There's been a decades-long smear campaign directed at third parties by the Democrats, and a number of other obstacles, including this issue with the election laws that require a certain percentage of the popular vote, and, tens of thousands of petition signatures, and plenty of other things there are a lot of hoops to jump through that are, it turns out, designed by Democrats and Republicans to make it so that there aren't any other parties.
Now, but again, though, with the Democrats choosing Hillary Clinton to carry their banner this year, a lot of people were saying like with all these random movements coming, Dem exit, or like, I guess a lot of the Bernie supporters, supposedly they were jumping ship, not going along with Hillary Clinton. Like, you would expect that this one, well, the expectation generated and fed to us was that the Green Party should be more successful than ever. And can you go exactly why you feel that's really not the case? Not just with evidence, but maybe what's your interpretation?
Well, I think that fear is a very powerful motivator, unfortunately. And so for a lot of people, there was a certain fear of doing anything that would empower or enable a Trump presidency. So I think that was probably a big deterrent because there's that false argument about how a third party vote is a vote for a Republican. or in the case, the same argument is used by Republicans trying to convince people to not vote libertarian. But at the same time, it seems to me that the Democrats have consistently failed. If we're to suppose that they are well-intentioned, their message has been, since at least as far back as 2010, that you need to take your medicine no matter how unpleasant and incompetent and corrupt we are. You have to support us because we're less terrible than those other guys over there. And I'm not entirely sure what it was, because I'm not part of the internal politics of the Democratic Party. I have no idea. We can guess based on a lot of stuff that made it out, but I can't help but wonder why. It seems to me that the Democrats basically saw the Romney campaign of 2012 and said, hey, we need one of those. Like, just the idea of having somebody who is hell-bent on getting elected but thoroughly uninspiring to the base. But, you know, I say that Clinton did extraordinarily well in the popular vote, and I don't think that should be discounted. That's clearly something that is worthy of analysis at the very least. But I guess when I think about the fact that I don't know. It's really hard to say. It's really, really hard to say.
Now, I remember, a lot of times people use the lack of triumph or the lack of like a beautiful stroke of victory or something like that from the Green Party as evidence for why they shouldn't be supported. What would you say to that?
Well, so yeah, there's that old line that people throw at us about how we should, run for dog catcher or whatever, start out small. And first of all, it's a weird joke because dog catcher is not an elected position. It doesn't even exist. But moving past that, though, the obvious silliness of it, there have been a lot of low-level Green Party successes. For example, I believe it's Fairfield or Fairfax, California, for quite some time was entirely had its city council and mayorship controlled by the Green Party. And during that time, they implemented this thing called the Fair Buck, which was a localized currency designed to keep wealth within the community. But the media tends to shut that stuff out because it doesn't fit the narrative that the people who own large media sources want to put forward.
That's very interesting. So you mean to say that sometimes even when you guys do get victories, they're not actually wide. They're basically not spread. Like nobody gets to know about them. That's always locked out. And then like when you don't do something or you don't reach something that you weren't even aiming to reach to begin with, that failure or the sort of manufacture of that failure, because that wasn't your goal, is spread far and wide, so everybody knows you didn't meet some expectation. And you're dealing with a very hostile media infrastructure, and that extends a little bit beyond just the corporate media, because let's talk about KPFT. We have a completely non-corporate media here in Houston called KPFT, and I know you said that you've been a part of it. Why don't you explain kind of what happened to you there?
Well, it's a bunch of stuff. I mean, frankly, he is kind of a tired and obsolete institution. There are a lot of old point out that it used to do some really radical, cool stuff. Got it bombed by the KKK. It's got an important past. A lot of organizations that depend upon donors in order to stay afloat tend to reach a point where they avoid conflict. And in avoiding conflict, they generally tend to avoid dealing with issues. For instance, it was a really contentious thing for a very long time to in any way question Israel's genocide in Palestine at KPFT. It was also there were a few years back, we tried to do an action to oppose the law that made it illegal to feed homeless people in Houston. And Dwayne Bradley wanted nothing to do with it, nothing whatsoever. So stuff like that is particularly damning, but I can't just blame the organization. I mean, it's what's made up of it. I mean, even people who were respected like Dean Becker, I recently got into it with him because he had the new chief of police, Art Acevedo, on his show. And Art Acevedo came on and basically said a couple of really non-committal comments about Texas is warming to marijuana. Didn't say, hey, I'm going to stop arresting people for this. Didn't say, hey, didn't say, here are my policies to address this problem. And so Becker basically has him on the show and acts all buddy-buddy and says, hey, look, we've got this great Democrat who's now the chief of police, and he's wonderful. And it totally glosses over a whole bunch of things like, this one's particularly close to home for me, actually. A couple of years back, toward the end of 2011, during the Occupy movement, Austin Police Department embedded agent provocateurs into the Occupy movement. These were police officers who came in and specifically got pushed for the creation of what's known as lockboxes. Essentially, people chain their arms together in order to more effectively shut down a road. And the undercover police who were involved showed up and actively pushed for this, got a whole bunch of people involved, and essentially escalated a minor act of civil disobedience into something where a whole bunch of people ended up with felony charges, myself included. And this was all the work of agent provocateurs who were specifically ordered there by Chief of Police Art Acevedo when he was in charge of Austin Police Department. So, and frankly, I'm not as familiar with his record as folks like Antonio Buehler. Antonio Buehler has been involved in Austin for a long time, specifically dealing with Art Acevedo's history of suppressing political movements, including nonviolent ones. So we've got a chief of police who is 100% okay with, and I assume he's okay with it because he hasn't come forth and apologized. He hasn't said anything about, I'm going to do different policies or anything. He's just moved on, presumably because he thinks it's A-okay to use state violence to put down peaceful political movement. And so that's who Dean Becker has on. That's who Dean Becker defends as being a great guy who's in charge of our police department now. And so it's entirely possible Acevedo may prove me wrong, but I don't think he will. And bring this back to the KPFT thing. I mean, this to me is, at least as far as I understand it, a larger problem with liberalism because of the fact that there's a reluctance to challenge authority. And so this is something that I assume that we should probably bring back in to have some level of introspect rather than getting defensive about it. I'm sure that there are some people who identify as progressive watching this show. These are things that we need to actually say, hey, how can we fix that?
Let me ask you another question. I remember, to go back to KPFT, these organizations follow like a non-governmental organization kind of deal, and they kind of depend upon donors, and they don't want to upset anybody. And some of these people have interests that may diverge from the interests of the populace as a whole, or suffering communities or people that have an issue that they need addressed. So they're unwilling to let those issues be aired on that platform, even though that's what it's supposedly built for. And so I just want to make that distinction to everybody that sometimes, I'll say it over and over and over, but power and privilege is not, compatible with truth and justice. This is just an issue where that came down to, and to go over that. I remember you guys blocked a road, and because you used that lockbox, it was considered like a dangerous object.
Yeah, the charge was a state jail felony of unlawful use of a criminal instrument.
Yes, a criminal instrument. I remember that because when you were on KPFT, I heard about it many years ago. I still remember that. It was in the middle of the daytime, and I heard that aired, and I was like, "What's going on there?" So that's actually a crucial point. I wanna move away from where we're gonna go into the limitations of liberalism and deferring to authority for a second, because I want to ask a couple of questions. I remember I was talking about the Green Party in general, and I know you hear some critiques of the Green Party, and I know I hear some of them, but let's talk about what you feel about them, and if I see something from our audience that piques the interest, I can move the conversation forward. I also want to bring them in, but where would you say the Green Party has to do a lot better as far as getting out there and basically attracting more voters?
Well, unfortunately, it has been my impression that there are a lot of Democrats who have been poached by the Green Party. That the Green Party has kind of tried to reach out to people who identified as Democrat for a long time and for whatever reason feel alienated, and that's been a strategy that I've been incredibly critical of for the 5 or 6 years I've been involved in the Green Party, and the reason being, it creates a problematic dynamic because what we end up with is a lot of fairly affluent, privileged white people who engage in all sorts of behaviors ranging from outright racism, sexism, and other oppressive behaviors to, just your standard microaggressions that really tend to alienate people. So I personally think that the Green Party, like most organizations dominated by affluent white people, needs to check its fucking privilege at the door. And until we're ready to do that, I don't know that it's possible for us to really move forward.
And that's from an inward perspective, right? Like this is like self-reflection, some things that can be worked on. Do you believe that that's the self-defeating? Because here's the thing, you're right. Maybe there is. I'm saying maybe, but certainly in the conversation that we're talking about, there is unchecked privilege that must be tackled. But surely that unchecked privilege is not an anomaly, right? It's something that's shared by the major political parties. So why then are those parties still able to gather the requisite support that they need to win election from disgruntled communities, and the Green Party is not?
Oh yeah, control of media and resources is certainly crucial. And I don't want to be unfair to the Green Party. I know that there's an expectation that I wear the party representative hat and come on here and cheerlead and say rah rah rah, aren't we great? But it seems to me that anytime an organization refuses to look inward and constantly try and improve itself, the moment that we start being dishonest outwardly about that, it, to me, just contributes to our obsolescence. So, I don't want to be unfair, but to the Green Party by being unusually critical representative and as a member. But at the same time, I do honestly believe that until and unless we acknowledge these things and commit to working on them, we can't really. I don't want to wear the hat of the White House, or the human resource manager who basically comes and blows smoke up your ass and pretends like we're 100% okay.
Okay, and that's fair. That's fair. What I really wanted was for everyone to be able to see that and understand that that's not the modus operandi of every individual member, right? that's maybe an institutional problem that has to be worked out, but it's something that is acknowledged by people from within the party, and it's something that's going to be continued to. It's going to be basically worked on moving forward, And now I'm gonna turn to some common critiques that I come to. I spoke to a political scientist, and he just says, that the Green Party fails because they pick poor politicians and they don't know how to basically properly sell whatever it is that they're seeking, or they should change their points to things that are further within the narrow band of the mainstream media, to what's acceptable to the mainstream populace before they can actually gain a lot of power. What would you say to that critique?
I guess to me, the reason that the Green Party appealed to me was because there was more focus on an understanding of what was right than there was on mass appeal. And it seems an unfortunate problem that this country seems to determine morality by consensus. So, yeah, I suppose it's valid. Maybe if we took a less offensive approach on confronting capitalism, for instance, then, yeah, maybe we might do a little bit better. I can't really refute that argument. It just seems to me symptomatic of a larger problem.
So, he further said that if you look at Jill Stein, as a politician, it seemed like the more exposure she got in the media, her polling numbers continue to decrease. What would you say to that as being evidence that she's a bad politician?
Well, to me, that requires that we ask the question of what is a good politician? Because ordinarily what passes for being a skilled politician, or, the watchword that got circulated so often during this past cycle, having experience. As far as I understand it, that's in the art of brokering deals. That's basically dealing with, owing powerful people favors or whatever. And otherwise dirty dealing. So, I mean, call me old-fashioned, but I'd rather a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington candidate than somebody who is skilled in the art of blowing smoke up people's asses, and horse trading, and log rolling, and pork barreling.
It almost seems as if you are, saying there's almost a demarcation almost between the political process and a personal politics and morality that guides it, or the philosophy that guides it. Those are two separate things. Do you feel like perhaps that she may have had too much on the actual principles and philosophy as opposed to the political process itself?
I don't. You see, I can't honestly say. Sorry, I got a little bit of a scratchy throat. I can't honestly say that somebody. I can't criticize somebody for being too principled. That seems so fucked up. I mean, how could we ever criticize somebody for being too principled? I've got a few critiques of the Stein campaign, but that's probably not one of them. I mean, I honestly, I know her, I respect her. I think that she means well. I think that she put a lot of effort into that campaign. And you know what? Maybe she could have greased a few more palms. Maybe she could have, lied to a couple of the right people. But I voted for her because she didn't do that. So I don't know. I really don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah, I think what the reason I brought you on here, and some of these questions are incredibly tough. I have my own soft spot, I think, when it comes to the Green Party. So I'm just gonna basically ask the questions, and maybe if we have time later, I'll give my thoughts on what I said at the time. But those are just some things that I've come up with. Let's even talk about the recount effort. Did you support it? Did you not support it? And why?
Well, I was mostly in opposition to it. I wasn't a vocal opponent of it. It happened so quickly that, from my perspective, I was in the middle of being inundated by law school stuff, which tends to be particularly hectic in November. So I missed out on a lot of it, but I wasn't alone in being critical of it. The National Green Party specifically rejected Stein's proposition to do this and asked her not to. There were key members of her campaign staff who also opposed her position on that, including her running mate, Pajama Baraka. So, this was something that I'm not entirely sure why she did it. I don't get the impression that it was the best way to spend a few $1 million. Like if I had that money in my hand, I would be trying to buy new infrastructure for places like Flint, Michigan, or at least contribute to it, not engaging in parliamentary process. Because it seems to me that, it's not like the vote counts really matter. We got this lesson back in 2000 in Bush v. Gore as well. But so Clinton wins the popular vote. We've got an electoral college, and during the electoral college vote, a couple of people who said they'd vote their conscience instead of who they were committed to basically were asked to leave. So, it's not like, as far as I can tell, it's not like there's going to be a whole lot of results in the ballots, except for finding out that, hey, surprise, surprise, we don't really have a democracy. But it seems strange to me that that it would be that convinces people that we don't have a functioning democracy. Not that people are totally okay with all of the stuff that happened in the wake of the Supreme Court gutting the Voting Rights Act, and Texas, within an hour, passing a whole bunch of stuff that wouldn't have passed the strict scrutiny of the Voting Rights Act. So, all of the millions of ways that the establishment tries to routinely deny people rights, not limited to voting, but plenty of other rights. So, I guess I have difficulty believing that showing that the votes were miscounted is going to be that thing that finally pushes people over the edge to understand that the powerful establishment of this country is not even remotely responsive to the wishes or desires of its populace.
That is a key thing, because I think here, my position was that if we exposed the fact that the tally is not exactly what's actually being, actually voted, there's a separation between the two, people would be more open to the idea that perhaps there is something wrong with the voting system, and perhaps we don't live in a democracy. I figured something like that would allow people to make that leap. But you're saying, of all the things that have happened, we've had things like this before in 2000 and whatnot, that, this is not really going to be the thing because we've already had greater things occur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we actively deny people the right to vote. It's not like people don't know what's happening. It's that people don't want to believe it.
So now, if that's the case, we're dealing with something completely different. How can we get people to confront an ugly truth?
What I suspect that people are going to continue to trust the establishment and what have you until they feel properly alienated from it. And people probably aren't going to feel properly alienated until some really bad stuff goes down. But I say that, I'm speaking with regard to privileged white people. It seems to me that people who have been more directly on the receiving end of this country's centuries of oppressive policies probably are already sufficiently alienated. But we have the FBI for to put down those movements.
That is also a highly insightful statement. I remember, we when I spoke to you, outside after a meeting one night, it really stuck out to me. We were talking. You said that somebody can be principled, they can be right, and they can be bold, like all the qualities for leadership, and they can just still fuck up. Yeah. That, like, perhaps in the wake of what's happened in this recount effort, perhaps this is just maybe that's just it. Because I noticed in your critique, you didn't mention a lot of the critiques people, commonly go to, such as it wasn't done correctly, or like, it wasn't fair handed, or she should have picked this state or that state. People are kind of nitpicking at, like, the actual process of the recount. And you went up to something and saying all of that effort, it wouldn't yield anything because we already have all of this evidence. So nobody's going to confront the reality that whatever it shows is actually going to illustrate for people. And that's an interesting take on it.
Yeah, well, for whatever reason, there are things that, for whatever reason, people will oftentimes not want to believe something, and for any number of reasons. And when they're committed to not wanting to believe something, there's no amount of evidence that you can put in front of them that's going to change their mind. I mean, we like to think that everybody is just, totally open to a new argument. That if we go up to our congressperson and show them evidence that, hey, there's this bad thing that's happening, that they're going to totally understand and change everything. They're not. And it's because people oftentimes have a vested interest in not understanding something. There's, an old quote from Upton Sinclair about how you should never underestimate a person's ability to not understand something when their salary depends upon them not understanding it. And so, like, when I look at things like this, let's, rewind to about 2 years ago when Eric Garner was literally murdered on film. Just outright murdered by police on a New York sidewalk in broad daylight. Okay. That was about as close to a real snuff film as you'll ever see on the news that I know of. And it seems to me that, like, that's not going to convince, if that didn't convince people that the police are racist as hell, as an organization, as individuals, and what have you, if that didn't convince people, then what else will? So when I look at more obvious instances of the will of the people being thoroughly ignored, it doesn't seem to me like, oh, well, this is going to be the thing that convinces everybody. Hey, look, they counted the vote wrong. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I accidentally pressed the mute so I can type some things. You guys don't need to hear me thunderously pounding away at my keyboard. The chat here is pretty rough today, But what I was going to say is I want to move towards talking about almost like the failure of liberalism. I'm going to read an email that I got from a certain liberal. And they were referring to my support of the Greens. They say they were referring to my non-support of Clinton and my critique of them for supporting Clinton. Okay. So it says, with all due respect, I don't think you know what you're talking about. You have not chosen your opponent wisely. I hope I am wrong, but I suspect you will find that the movement that develops under Trump's far-right administration and totally conservative control of the federal government is going to be far more centrist than the one that would have grown during a Clinton presidency. We'll still be here when you realize the fight is now not about achieving single payer, but about saving Medicare, or not about reining in bankers, but preventing cuts to Social Security. Good luck to us all.
Yeah, and so First of all, I want to share with you a quote that I rather like. It's from an anthropologist named David Graeber, who is totally worth checking out if you get a chance. But this is a quote from a book that he wrote called The Democracy Project. That's, liberals tend to be touchy and unpredictable because they claim to share the ideals of the radical movements: democracy, egalitarianism, and freedom. But they've also managed to convince themselves that these ideals are ultimately unattainable. For that reason, they see anyone determined to bring about a world based on those principles as a kind of moral threat. And illustrated in this email is, first of all, the premise that you must be wrong, you must be stupid or uneducated, or any number of problems that are meant to discredit your worldview. Okay, because obviously, there must be something wrong with you, if you don't agree with me, the privileged white liberal. But baked into that is this idea that a Republican presidency is going to be a whole lot worse than a Democratic presidency. And yeah, there are some differences that are noteworthy to some, but in the broader scheme of things, I mean, what is a Donald Trump presidency going to do? Are they going to gut public housing? Are they going to engage in all sorts of austerity programs that basically cut funding for public needs? Are they going to cut spending on education? Are they going to give handouts to rich corporations? Oh, wait, are they going to be in bed with big bankers? Are they going to engage in imperialism via drones? Are they going to disrespect international consensus on dealing with what is and is not a war crime? Are they going to intern people without due process? Oh, wait. Have I listed a single thing that hasn't happened under a Democratic presidency? So, like, when we start accepting this premise that seems to be suggested by that email and the howls of every angry liberal who is disappointed that we wouldn't that people just didn't vote for Clinton as much as they were instructed to by the really, really, really smart liberals in charge, it seems to me that it requires a certain blindness to be totally uncritical of what the last several years under Democratic leadership has yielded.
And to be fair to this individual, they do actually acknowledge all the problems, but rather than taking that knowledge and including it into their analysis and saying, well, maybe I should or should not support it, they say, well, we have to. There's nothing else we could do. So they literally don't allow that knowledge to come into play when it comes down to their decision making in the political arena. And I think that's particularly problematic because every vote is support. You can't say that you don't support this, but you turn around and vote for it every time. When it comes down to it, you can complain about it, you can talk crap about them, 364 days of the year. But if on election day you go in there and you vote for them, what have you really done? You haven't done anything. Because right, along with your activism, being out in the streets, protest, using your platform to talk about all the dirty things that they do, there's a part where the rubber has to hit the road too. And it's, to come full circle, you have to align that with your electoral strategy. And I think that part of the reason why the Democrats have gotten so far out of alignment as they have is because we're not doing that.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. And I'm kind of surprised that 2014 didn't deliver that message. Don't deliver on policy, you're going to get hammered at the polls. It really amazes me that message 12 either. Because it seems that one opportunity that you have to hold them accountable, the other 364 days of the year, show up and, kiss your baby and pretend like they give a damn about you, but they're not going to implement that in policy. So, yeah, it seems to me that election day, that's the one time that you're negotiating from a position of power. When they're on the campaign trail, they, of course, say, oh, it's so important that you vote for us and stuff like that. Please don't hold us accountable. Bernie Sanders famously said right before the election, now is not the time for a protest vote.
Okay, so I have to cut you off. Well, that's a good question. When is the time to actually challenge and actually really put up a successful challenge where it'll actually have long-lasting effects? When are you going to say, enough is enough? When do you cut your losses and understand that you are not special? Many people before you have tried to take this institution, have tried to change this institution, and they've all been defeated. But somehow you have the special fairy dust that's going to make it all better. We need to check our own hubris before we go in and make the same mistakes as the people before us and the people before them. I will agree with that. I'm going to have to close it off there. I want to thank everybody. Tonight, we actually have to close a little bit earlier than usual. We're having some production changes that'll be occurring, so we'll have to close out a little bit earlier. But I want everybody to remember, power concedes nothing without demand.
Never will.
Never has, never will. I knew you remember. I knew you'd get that second half. I knew it.
Of course, bro. Anyway, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.